That's right. That's the way it is. Yeah. She was going 6 knots. So you could look.
Yeah, good hits like that.
Nothing to protect, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
You can start it.
Okay, and then you need.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Sure, sounds good. Thank you so much.
She's 28, she weighs 100 pounds.
Ready?
She's doing around the world
He needs 30 seconds.
right now.
Didn't hear that, Pat.
15 months. Talking to her.
Sophie's still here tonight?
No, she had a family event. She had to leave.
Yeah.
She's a sick family member.
Where's that offended? Please do send it to me.
Yeah, send it out. It's going to be at US Senate on March 3rd, Sunday, March 3rd at 1:30. Sit?
I do.
Oh, you did?
It's freezing.
At a Freeport? Yeah. Oh, cool.
I'm at Cape February 25.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
It's been 30 seconds, don't you think?
It has? Okay. Okay, microphone's on, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to the February 21st, 2024 meeting of the Project Review Board. Information exchange, Caroline?
Sure. So the planning board has started the initial stages of updating the town's comprehensive plan. The town has engaged North Star Planning, which you guys are aware of because you were involved in that interview process. They're starting to publicly review draft chapters. So we just got the first 3 draft chapters, the inventory chapters that are required by the state of Maine. So the planning board just saw the first draft, gave the consultants some feedback. They're making changes, and then we are going to go live with a new website launch for the comprehensive plan, and the drafts will be up there. So before you know it, I'll be spamming you regularly with more opportunities of things to read in your free time. So pretty much monthly, the planning board over the next couple months will be looking at multiple chapters a month. This month, they'll be looking at transportation, this month being March, transportation, marine resources, and one other that I can't think of off the top of my head. One that is piquing a lot of interest is the housing chapter. We'll have a lot of data and statistics. So the process is staff sees a draft, we circulate it to applicable staff members, we give feedback, it gets refined. We then have a version we share with the planning board, which is the same, they do the same thing, they go through it, give feedback. We're then gonna put it online for people to look at, and at that point, we'll be doing specific outreach to neighbors. We think we'll start really a more robust public discussion process probably in early spring. So that's the update on the comp plan. The council recently took action on adopting amendments to zoning ordinances that pertain to LD 2003, which is the state rules for new housing opportunities in municipalities. That resulted in significant changes to our ordinances. They adopted the recommendations stemming from the Central Core Working Group on amendments to design review. That resulted in a significant shrinking of the current design review district and changes to the ordinance, some of which we will talk about later tonight as they come up. And then the third thing that just got adopted by the cannabis was land use standards for cannabis. Did I just say cannabis already? Standards for cannabis cultivation and manufacturing and processing facilities, which is something the planning board had looked at over all of '22, and it's been sitting there because it was waiting for licensing. So I think staff had emailed you all to see if you would like new ordinance binders. The most up-to-date ordinances are on the web. There'll be another new version up there either tomorrow or Monday. We're happy to print them. So if you haven't responded to Cecilia that you want them printed and you change your mind or you do, just send her an email. We'll be happy to get those together for you. We'll be talking about a couple of them tonight as we get into new applications. So applications, depending when they came in and the review process, will be reviewed under the ordinances that were effective at that time. So a lot of tonight's agenda items were tabled, so they came in under the ordinances that we've been talking about for years. As we get further into the agenda, there's one application that came in under the new design review ordinance. So depending on the time, we'll take a little bit and just kind of look at what those tweaks are before you dive into that discussion. And the Downtown Vision Task Force really has kind of been silent. I believe at one of the next two council meetings, there will be an update on the Downtown Vision implementation. There's a lot of different things happening. From a land use perspective, we've been making changes with design review. We're about to release a design review overhaul RFP. We are working with GPCOG. We get a grant to hire an outside source to do a parking analysis of downtown parking, kind of to help us look at the parking situation and if the requirements, the surplus, to figure out what the tipping point is for if we repurpose some of these lots and bring in more housing, how much capacity do we really have and at what point or do we have a shortage? And a component of that will also be looking at on-street parking. So those are a couple projects that are going on tied to the Downtown Vision charters that we've been talking about now for the past year. And since there's not enough going on, we're in the last stages of the town of Freeport's climate action plan. So Maddie Smith, our sustainability coordinator, has been working with the Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board on that. They had a meeting, I think a week and a half ago. They looked at the draft actions coming out of that plan. A lot of them are more policy decisions, so they're not necessarily things that will come to you for initial implementation, but if we change the land use standards to become more sustainable community, you'll see them in that way. At the next FSAB meeting next Monday, they're going to have a full rollout of the plan and a presentation. It will be available online or copies here for public feedback. So if you haven't seen that plan, again, it's online. We've talked about that before. Happy to email it, give people paper copies if you want to look at it and provide feedback as we move forward. We already talked about the comp plan, and we already talked about the amendments approved by the council. The only thing I'll give you a heads up on is that projects for March are due next week, and we're already up to 8. So rest up. If they keep coming in, I might reach out to you for a second meeting if that's warranted. That's all I have for you.
Thanks, Caroline. Next item is review of the minutes from the January 17 meeting. Anyone have any comments or additions to what Sharon gave us? Great. And since we're not doing any members via Zoom tonight, we don't need to do roll call vote. Right?
Yep, let's just make sure that no members hopped on. We do not have any members.
Great. So is there a motion to accept the minutes from the January 17 meeting as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor? Unanimous. First item of business is Depot Square extension request for the conceptual review approval.
So I don't see the applicant here unless, let me see if he might be online. I don't see Dominic online. Dominic, if you are here online under a different name, if you could just raise your hand. I do not see him. The applicant is supposed to be present for you guys to take up an application if you have questions. In this case, I feel like it's pretty straightforward if you want to talk about it, but if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Why don't you give us a little more background so we don't need to
Sure.
talk about it?
Okay, so it was about a year ago that we had an application come forward for a small multifamily housing project on Depot Street. It's where the current Petrillo's building sits. You may remember that building had a fire, and they're proposing to demolish the building and put up an 8-unit multifamily. So they came, the board granted conceptual, and you said, let's have a site walk before you come back. So we did that, but it's been taking them longer to get plans and engineering done. You might remember the site is pretty small and it's pretty limited for where it can go. It's really mostly a parking lot. It's not like they're removing a lot of vegetation. So in this case, don't feel like they have a lot of options. So interestingly enough, when we were reviewing the ordinance for a major subdivision, you go conceptual, preliminary, final. And it acknowledges that you need to come back within 6 months between preliminary and final. If you can't, the board will grant an extension. And so when I talked to the applicant, they're like, hey, we still want to do the project. We're trying to get plans done. And of course, that's an additional expense. We looked at this. And so for a minor subdivision, you go conceptual to final. And it says you should, if you resubmit for final, beyond 6 months, the board can make you go back to concept. It doesn't require that action, but since it's been a year before the applicant goes out and puts money into all the engineering and all the drawings, they're looking from an indication to the board that, do you think they're okay to continue on, or do you feel like they need to come back with conceptual plans, from a staff perspective, due to the nature of the site and the project, and that the board's still here and standards haven't changed for subdivision or density that would limit that project today. I don't really have a problem with it. The only thing I would suggest, which isn't a draft motion here, is that if you do that, you say they come back within 6 months or whatever timing's good with the board, because as it goes on, board members could change, we could forget, standards can change, so I wouldn't want you to leave it open-ended, and I don't think it's fair if boards do change,
So the motion is for 6-month extension. Applicant says he can have everything in within 2 or 3 months, he thinks, so it sounds like it works. Is there a motion?
Just a question. Does this have any, because there is an existing building there now that has extensive fire damage, is this related to, the need to tear that building down, or are these two completely independent?
I can't comment on that. When I've talked to the applicants, I've always been focused on the application before, so I don't know the status of the building. I mean, if it's not marked condemned or safety hazard or
Okay.
anything like
Okay.
that at this point.
Okay.
Is it already, is the timeline with which an extension is required, has that already passed?
So again, for this, it's weird because it doesn't give you that concrete window that you have to grant an extension. It just leaves it really vague. You can come back, but if it's beyond 6 months, we might send you back to concept. So because it's been a year, we're bringing this back to you to get an indication from the board if he's okay to proceed with the engineering and the drawings before he comes back, because otherwise you're just kind of winging it. It's definitely flagged as something when we clean up the ordinance we should address and be more concrete on, in fairness to all parties, I think.
I don't think it's officially expired because of the gap in the wording of our ordinance.
Because for minor, there's a gap in the wording in the ordinance. For major, there would be a clear expiration, which again, you guys have still always looked at on a case-by-case basis.
So without having a formal expiration, then we're okay to act on it as a traditional extension?
Yeah, in this case, I'm really looking at it as a fairness thing to the applicant and the board, because we are already a year out.
Yeah. Sure.
And this is definitely a minor, it's not on the edge based on number of units or square
No,
footage.
it's 8 units on public utilities, and I think you guys, if I'm remembering right, it was a year ago, I think you might have done conceptual at the first meeting, because it is really, that building and parking lot, it's really a cleared site already.
Is there a motion?
Sure. Proposed motion, be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board determines that at this time, Charter Main Properties applicant for the proposed Depot Square 8-unit multiple-family dwelling, tax assessor map lot 10, lot 24-2, 15 Depot Street, will not need to resubmit the inventory and analysis plan to the board to allow for additional time for the applicant to file for final subdivision plan review, in that the site walk has been held, the applicant continues to work towards satisfying the submission requirements of the Freeport subdivision ordinance for a minor subdivision, with a condition that the applicant return to the board within 6 months of this action.
Is there a second?
Just one question. If we do have a changeover of board members, would it be fair to require another site walk
We can discuss it. It'd be appropriate to discuss.
at that time?
So you
Okay.
guys, I mean, people, move, change, resign for whatever reasons. You have 2 members that their terms were up at the end of March that I don't know if they're termed out or have the option for reappointment, but otherwise you'd have 5 people that, if nobody resigns, would be consistent over the next year.
Okay,
Is that a second?
second.
Any discussion? Okay, call a vote. All in favor of the motion as read? Okay, unanimous, Sharon. 30 Morse Street. This is for seeking final approval for design review certificate and site plan review for a complicated piece of Freeport.
Is that an official description?
Yeah, that's the zoning
So I
description.
feel like we're dusting off old applications tonight. So Christian, the applicant, and Amanda, they were here, I think, twice before in the past. They purchased a small property with an existing foundation in the VC1. It used to be a very modest, single-family home, but due to various things, it lost its non-conforming status. So they want to reside here and have a small business, so they're coming forward with a mixed-use development. A mixed-use development is a structure in which there's a commercial and residential use. It doesn't get into sizes, it doesn't get into square footages and all those details. It's just one permitted use in the zone and at least one residential unit in one building. This is a very complicated site, as well summarized by Ford. It's a 50 by 50 lot. It's surrounded by a large parking lot. It's the last parcel in the VC1 and in the design review district. And so when we did the site walk between this parcel going towards Main Streets and design review, the Moore Street School across the street and anything past this house are all outside of design review and all in a different zone. So we've had a lot of conversations about this building. They are building in two factors in consideration. So a previous decision was granted by the Board of Appeals many years ago to reduce setbacks, and then because it's in the VC1, they could have further reduction in certain setbacks if they built to non-combustible construction. So that means that the actual walls of the building are non-combustible, and they would have a variety of materials that they could use on the outside, but they still need to meet that non-combustible strategy. So when we looked at this, it is a small site and they're trying to fit stuff on. So with regards to the building design, the board had given feedback to the applicant about the building height, and so they've made changes to the building in the way they are constructing it and constructing the base of the first level. So they've dropped it, I believe, about 6 inches, but Christian will get all into that. So the actual ground up height to the highest point is only 22.5 feet. They have also adjusted trim. They have added a fascia board at the top. We had past conversation, I think Jason had made some comments about the roof lines and some changes they could do there, so they have incorporated that. And they also provided the board with 2 different color renderings that they'd be willing to consider whatever the board feels like would more adequately meet the standards of the design review ordinance. So, clearly when they came in, they felt like it met design review. There were some differences of opinions. You gave them more feedback. They've made further adjustments and also done some things to break up the facade of the building. Again, this is a 50 by 50 site. With regards to site features, it remains a complicated little lot. They meet the impervious area requirement. For parking, they need 2.49 parking spaces. They can fit one space in the garage, which the ordinance says they can count. They showed 2 additional parking spaces, but they were not located entirely on private property, which off-site needs to be. You weren't able to confirm otherwise, correct? Because they are in VC1, they would have the ability to meet the parking requirement via leased parking. So I think they have the option of 2 options. They could take another look at the site. If they find a way to add a parking space that meets the dimensional requirements, they could come back for a site plan amendment, or they could lease parking just like any other commercial user. So I feel like because they have that option, I'm not concerned about the parking. We make that contingent before, they can get their C of O, just like we do for commercial spaces. The VC1 does have some requirements for the front setback, landscaping, benches, planters. In this case, other than the driveway, which is already there, they're just going to repave it. They are proposing grass in the front setback. Because they are on the zone line, there is a buffer requirement on the west side between this property, which is a commercial property, and the abutting residential property. It's a very unique situation that the abutting residential driveway encroaches onto this property. So there's already no vegetation there because that driveway's over the line. I guess that itself is really a private property matter between the 2 of them. You're not approving that encroachment staying there. You're approving their site plan. At this point, they are not, to my knowledge, going to make the neighbor go out and rip up the driveway, but they're also thereby not proposing any additional buffering. There's limited vegetation there. They are proposing to retain it. Otherwise, we don't really have any outstanding items. Really just wanted to flag those last 2 things to make sure that they are okay with the board.
And the inability to meet the 2.49 parking spots is not to be a condition of the order if we approve this?
I think actually there's a draft condition here that, let's see. Usually what we say, so here it says, prior to certificate of occupancy being issued for the building, the applicant submit documentation that their parking requirement for the project has been met. So they would have number 4, they would have the ability to lease parking spaces through the pool, which the town oversees. There's parking available, or again, if they, want to keep looking at it and figure out a solution and want to come back. But I do feel like at this point, they've looked pretty hard at this site and tried to maximize what they can fit on there.
Christian and Amanda, update us. You processed all of our suggestions and explained your responses in your most recent submission. Thanks for that.
Yes, so the most significant one was dropping the roof line by about 6 feet, which is a pretty substantial reduction. And we accomplished that by essentially making it a flat roof. But as Caroline was saying, we did rejigger the timing of the windows and the cladding choices as well to achieve more of a traditional look. Still a very modern design, but we feel like we took a step in that direction. So we're hoping that the revisions are satisfactory.
Any questions from the board?
Where does the 2.64 parking space?
Oh, the
How does that get calculated for this property?
2.49. So we look at the residential portion, which is a single family. So single family requires 2 parking spaces. And then for the office, we look at the shared parking table in section 514. And I think it's 1 per 300, and they have like 150, I can't remember. Anyway, so the math of the size of the office based upon the 1 per whatever square feet comes out to the 0.49. And we do in Freeport calculate parking to the first decimal. So if they have the one garage space on site and they're leasing, they would actually enter into a lease for 1.5 parking spaces.
It could be anywhere in the downtown, it doesn't have to be contiguous to that.
Well, we have that whole lease parking pool, which is a whole nother conversation that could take all night, so we won't get into that. But there's a lease parking pool that the town oversees. People with surplus parking enter their parking into that pool, and when a commercial user comes in and is like, hey, I need parking, they have the ability to lease through that parking pool, and the town keeps track so that people aren't like triple leasing their spaces and stuff like that.
And we ask applicants to lease to the decimal.
Yes, the 10th decimal.
Does this board have any flexibility to waive that requirement?
You do not.
There are so many odd zoning requirements that are imposed on you because of the size of this property and everything. I can't recall why you have the light shaft in the middle of the building. Was that an aesthetic, or is that because of a zoning requirement?
That's more of an aesthetic decision.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. The roof shape is dictated by zoning, though, which is an important point. We have to slope away from the lot line, and so that's part of the reason it's essentially a flat roof.
There's also not a lot of yard space, so having a little bit of a balcony that's private on the interior, like the
Yeah.
inside, feels nice.
Yeah, and the bridge, I thought, it's just all nice. Yeah.
And you are reusing the existing foundation on the site,
Correct.
too. The foundation was there years ago, it's just capped, if you may remember from the sidewalk.
Any other questions from the board before I ask for public comment? This is not a public hearing, but we always welcome public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to speak or ask a question about this? Okay. When it's clear there aren't any more questions, we can entertain a motion.
I just, it's outside our purview, but I'd just like to state that I hope as we're going through the update to our comprehensive plan, that, yeah, I think you're certainly, have listened to us and very much appreciate that. And thank you very much for that. I just, having spent some time in the West End, in Portland, and seeing that neighborhood lose its way from a design element, I hope through our comprehensive plan process that we will be encouraging less modern-like structures in our downtown area, in other parts of Freeport as well, so that they are more consistent with the surroundings. And I know this was a very challenging site, but I think there's some places where we just need to respect the surroundings. And so, that's it.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion, do I have to read the whole thing? or
You
not?
do. Caroline makes us read the whole thing for the benefit of
Rescind
everybody
my-
else.
no, I'll- All right. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve a design review certificate and site plan approval for Christian Stevens and Amanda Gale for a building to be used as a mixed-use development, residential and office, at 30 Morse Street, Tax Assessor Map 11, Lot 54, to be built substantially as proposed, most recent site plan dated 1/31/24, finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport Design Review Ordinance and Section 602 of the Freeport Zoning Ordinance, with the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, Prior to the start of any site walk for the project, the applicant do the following. A, obtain approval of an easement from the Freeport Town Council for the stormwater drainage pipe to be allowed to be located in the public right-of-way. B, obtain approval of a street opening permit from the Freeport Department of Public Works for any work in the public right-of-way. C, obtain approval for a driveway entrance permit from the Freeport Public Works for the change of use of the driveway to serve the mixed-use development. Number 3, prior to applying for any permits from the code enforcement officer, the applicant submit copies of capacity to serve letters from Maine Water Company and the Freeport Sewer District for the change of use to mixed-use development. 4, prior to a certificate of occupancy being issued for the building, the applicant submit documentation that the parking requirement for the project has been met. Period.
I'll second that.
Second. All in favor of the motion is read. Unanimous, Sharon, thank you. Next agenda item is Whitetail Drive subdivision. This is up for final subdivision approval, a 4-acre subdivision on a 4-lot subdivision for a total of 8 dwelling units on an 8-acre parcel. At conditional approval, we resolved that the utilities could stay above ground as they presently exist, as far as they exist. Anything else to add?
So, no, I feel like with most applications, between preliminary and final, they are really wrapping up a lot of the engineering. So they worked with Adam on the road, a town engineer, on the road design, the entrance, stormwater management. He did issue a memo signing off on those components of the project. They did make some changes to the recording plat. Standard notes are on there, like, the notes were tweaked a little bit, but to reflect the requirements of the ordinances. There's an existing duplex, so any houses built after the date of the approval, if it's granted, would have to be sprinklered, and also the utilities would need to be underground. You did have a last-minute email from the town attorney. They did do final sign-off on the legal docs. They have a few minor modifications, which the applicants agreed to. So that's been added as a standard condition of approval. They've worked with DEP and Army Corps to do all the after-the-fact permitting, because again, they did not intend to do a subdivision, so they had to after-the-fact permit for the vernal pool and the wetland impacts for the culvert installation. Staff really doesn't have any outstanding items with this application. Standard conditions here would be letter of credit, which they submitted a cost estimate and the town engineer approved, inspection account in the amount of $2,000 for inspection of the site improvements by the town engineer, applicable impact fees, stormwater maintenance, and submitting a final copy of the legal documents. So I don't have anything outstanding with this application. If you do decide to take action on this tonight, you do have, if you don't change any of the proposed conditions, you do have some paper plans that you would sign at the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Adrian?
All right, thank you. Adrian Fine, Teradyne Consultants, representing the project. Caroline kind of gave the overview of what's happened since the last time we were here. We were here in October for preliminary. We're here tonight for final. This is the same plan that we were looking at in October in terms of site layout. That hasn't changed. We worked with the town engineer since we were last here, responding to comments about stormwater items and some technical design items, one of which was the driveway, or it's called a driveway entrance permit with DOT, which we had, but we ended up going back and getting it updated. I know the board had some concerns about it. The engineer wanted to make sure DOT was still okay with it, so we worked with them and have the new permit that represents exactly what's going on here now that it's going to be 4 lots, which was a little different than when they first got the permit. So that was the biggest change. And then just making sure that the grading right at the entrance where the road hits Route 1 is exactly how DOT wanted it to be. So we made those tweaks to the plan. Most of the other items that we worked on with the town engineer were kind of minor detail, technical items, just to make sure all the details were in the plan set. And then, as Caroline mentioned, the subdivision plan that has all the conditions on it, including the one about the wells and water. I know that was something that was also pointed out at the last meeting to make sure that was in writing on the documents. And then, yeah, we provided the financial capacity letters with the amount approved by the town engineer from the estimate that we prepared. And other than that, I think we're just here to answer any other questions you may have.
The only thing I'll add, in case you read the motion, because I know you'll ask me, is that there is a last condition, proposed condition tacked on there that says plantings will be installed per the approved plan set. The plan set has some plantings that they need to do for revegetation per DEP permitting, but you might remember early on, which you can faintly see between buildings 2 and 3, there's a couple trees along the back property line, which the applicants had agreed to plant in an area that the clearing went over, and so that's included in the planting plan. So we did put that condition on the recording plat, just to fill, I mean, there's still significant tree buffer on the other side, but they were proposing a couple plants in there, and that was from our earlier conversation.
Any questions from the board? I know you had a couple of, you fielded a couple questions from abutters that I think you were all resolved to everyone's satisfaction, right?
Yeah, at the last meeting, one of them was about the plantings, and then there was another abutter who had a question about the septic on this lot in the back here, and we moved that, based on that conversation, as much as we could away from their property line. There was some wiggle room, and that was essentially what they were asking for, is to move it away from their property line as much as we could, and we did that.
Great.
Oh,
Remember the lights shining.
maybe have to come up here.
Are there any questions from the board?
I have just a quick technical question. The sheet that's in front of us, that was put here tonight in front of us, is that the sheet that is the recording sign sheet?
Yeah, so this was emailed to you too, so the recording plat has to legally be stamped by the surveyor, so you'll see that. And then they have to show all the corner pins, and they were missing a couple pins here, so those have been added. And then we worked with Adrian and the applicant to put any of the proposed conditions that needed to be on the plan in notes. So I think they added one note, they added the surveyor's stuff, and then they added the pins. Otherwise, nothing else has changed.
All right, so I guess maybe I wasn't aware of this before. Since I've been on this board, I haven't had the opportunity to sign too many completed plans. There's no, I think you had mentioned, there's no house locations
The
put on
recording,
here?
the recording plan is very limited as to what is supposed to be on it for the requirements of the ordinance. With the current code officer, we stopped putting building envelopes on here because we found a lot of times they were actually not getting drawn on there correctly. And if they're on the plan, we can only permit what's on the plan, even if it's more strict. So we had a lot of applications coming in where they had to build in this envelope that wasn't done correctly, and it was actually more restrictive. So we've gone to the strategy of putting the setbacks on there so that when they come in, they can determine what that is. That is not always the case. In some cases, developers like to put restrictions that you can't clear beyond a certain area. So in those cases, you would see a plan come in with a building envelope, and that's what would be stuck to, but that's why you don't see it here.
Okay, and the circular line around where the septic and the well, is that a
That's the well
radius?
exclusion zone, yep. So their wells will be outside of there, and they are well aware that they're putting the septics in the back corner, and that's what this is showing.
So if we were concerned about a house placement when they go do the work, and they do it, like right up to a buffer line, there's nothing we could do about it.
Right, they have to meet the setbacks of the ordinance, which are what are on here. And again, for the open space subdivisions, they have smaller lots, smaller setbacks, everything's clustered, and then you have the open space around them.
Okay, thank you.
And we can't require more than the ordinance does. I mean, in the case of like a vernal pool setback or something like that, but.
And they are listed, the numbers are listed for the setbacks in the notes on the plan.
Any other questions or comments from the board? We've already had a public hearing at a prior meeting, but welcome comments or questions from the public if there are any. Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll go ahead and read it. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of fact and subdivision plan for Todd and Michelle Harrison and William Davenport of the Whitetail subdivision, for the Whitetail subdivision, 4-lot, 8-unit, open space, tax assessor map, lot 17, map 18, lots 17 and 17-2, recording plat dated January 9, 2023, revised through February 20th, 2024, to be built substantially as proposed, finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport subdivision ordinance with the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. Number 2, prior to the sale of any units/lots, the applicant shall provide the town planner with a letter from a professional land surveyor stating that all monumentation shown on the plan has been installed. 3, the applicant shall provide the town with digital file in format compatible with the assessor's records containing the information shown on the recording plan. 4, the final signed copy of the recording plan shall be recorded in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds within 90 days of the date upon which the plan is signed, otherwise the plan shall become null and void. 5, prior to any site work, including but not limited to clearing of the site, and prior to the issuance of any building permits, the applicant do the following. A, enter into a maintenance agreement for a stormwater management system with the town of Freeport to be recorded in the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds with yearly stormwater reporting to the town of Freeport being required. B, establish a performance guarantee in the amount to cover the cost of all site work associated with the project in the amount of $297,522.50 in a form acceptable to the town attorney. The performance guarantee, in accordance with Article 12.9 of the Freeport subdivision ordinance, shall cover the cost of all site work, including the road, erosion control, stormwater management, landscaping, and demarcation of property lines, etc. Along with the performance guarantee, a non-refundable administrative fee at the rate established by the Freeport Town Council be paid. C, establish an inspection account in the amount of $2,000 to cover the cost of site inspection of site improvements by the town engineer. D, the developer shall have a pre-construction meeting with the town engineer. E, the applicant submit a final copy of the updated legal documents to the town planner. 6, item 6, pay a pavement maintenance impact fee at the time a building permit is applied for and based upon the size of the structures, the length of the subdivision road, and the current impact fee effective at such time. 7, plantings will be installed per approved plan type.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion?
Can I just kind of add to the record that I intend on voting against this project, not because I'm concerned with the project, but because I believe that we don't have adequate authority in the ordinance to grant the waiver that we've done with the utilities. I know that's an issue we've already addressed, and the majority concluded differently, but I just wanted to kind of clarify that I'm voting no, and that's why.
Thanks, Jim. Any other discussion before we vote? All in favor of the motion as read? Sharon, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor, and opposed? 1 opposed. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for all of your time.
Thank you.
Next item is LL Bean, Design Review Certificate and Site Plan Amendment, seeking tonight final approval for Phase 1 of the elevation on Main Street and around the corner on part of Jason's Way for the flagship store.
So this is another application that you've seen a couple times and you've done a site walk on. So when you first, there's going to be a major update to the entire flagship campus, as you're aware. They are already in the building doing some work, and they did need to get some approvals, but weren't ready for the whole thing. So they talked to the board, and the board was okay, and wanted the applicant to come up with a phasing plan. So they presented the phasing plan at a past meeting, got some feedback from the board at the last meeting on the design, and is here. So I think it's important that, we had a lot of discussion last time, but I think it's really important that we look at what the applicant's proposing, and that's what we're here to react to tonight. I'll take the easy route and summarize the site improvements first, because it's the easier of the two. So as you know, they are proposing on the facade of the building closest to the sidewalk on Main Street, there's an entrance that used to go into Coffee by Design. They are proposing to eliminate that entrance and put, as we've been talking about for past 3 meetings, I think, an entrance on the Justin's Way side and an entrance on the south side. So you won't have that conglomerate of people right on the sidewalk there. It'll be broken up to the 2 entrances, but as you know, those are still not going to be the main entrances to the flagship store when said and done. The main entrance is going to be further up towards the upper plaza. So on the Justin's Way Main Street corner, they're proposing a flat patio where people could get into the building. And as talked about at the last meeting, they're going to do some supplemental landscaping there to kind of soften that corner and screen it a little bit. On the entrance near, facing the south, where they have that whole tiered plaza, there's actually a little pond hidden back there. Well, a pond's a generous word, but a water holding area. So there's a kind of elaborate plaza there with steps and stone walls and boulders, and so they are proposing to move back the stone wall, retain as much as possible, but they do want to fit that flush surface so that you can come right off the sidewalk and go into the area. And then they will add some supplemental vegetation behind there where they're going to fill in that depression that's holding the water. Most of the large vegetation, as you saw in the renderings on the plaza, is actually going to be retained. So they're adding the 2 pockets of landscaping near the 2 new entrances. And then there's a small area on the upper plaza that showed in the plan that they're also proposing to add some additional vegetation. So now that I've taken the easy route out, I'll give you a high-level overview of the building facade. So at the last meeting, we talked a lot about the facade along Main Street. There's actually 2 areas where they're going to add windows. They're removing that door, so they're going to fill that in, but they are proposing to keep the awnings because that was something that the board had great concern on at the last meeting. The other thing the board wanted to see was some green to kind of connect the visual appearance of the building. And so in addition to retaining the green awnings, which really is not the preference, or was not the preference of the applicant, they're also painting that top fascia board green to kind of make that connection that the board wanted to see. Both of the new entrances and all the replacement windows are going to match the aluminum storefront that's already used there on the L.O. Bean site. They are proposing canopies over those 2 entrances that would be made of metal. When you go around the corner on the south facade, you have that existing wall that's really all windows. They're not proposing changes for kind of the front portion until you get back where that existing door is, which, as you know, they're going to close off that door. I think they might have some signage or murals there, which really won't be visible from the right-of-way, so which really wouldn't be under the purview of the board. And the stair tower, I will say, I thought there was significant change to the design of the stair tower from the initial submission. The board had concerns about the color. They've changed the color. And then they have actually added some openings to that facade, which was another concern that the board had, and mimicking some of the windows seen on the Main Street side. In the upper building facade where the locked moose are today, they are also proposing some building improvements. So this is the part that's a little bit tricky because the board said, we want to see everything, what it's going to look like from Main Street. But we know this is a phased project. So when you're looking at it, you're going to see where they're going to come back to you next month for the demolition approval of the 1940 structure. They're going to take that down, put in a big addition, which is going to face the inside but it's gonna have an end facade, which is going to face Main Street. So because you asked to see that complete facade view in the first phase, they have done just that. But be aware, we don't have what's around the corner. That's gonna come back to you next month, but what you wanted to see is the whole thing together, how that new end facade's gonna relate to the tower and the windows and the materials, and so I do feel that's what they have for you tonight. They do have some additional slides, I think, to show you, to walk you through the materials and really call out the proposed changes, because there's a lot of drawings, and when you look at them, it's hard to tell, so I think you'll get some good information here.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, everybody. Just a reminder, my name's Catherine Wise. I'm the Senior Manager of Design and Planning for LL Bean. I'm excited to show you tonight. Caroline did a great job expressing the changes we've made. I also just want to take this time to thank you. This has been, over the last few months, we've had site walks, we've had an iterative design process, and I think it's a really strong design that we're going to show you tonight. I think it's going to really enhance the downtown and the kind of experience of our visitors. We're here tonight for Project Area 1, which Caroline described, and we are seeking final approval, which includes the Main Street changes, which Caroline outlined, and then that upper portion of Main Street. So with that, this presentation is reflective of the materials you have, but to Caroline's point, sometimes it's easier to see on screen. So in the yellow there is Project Area 1. That is, we extended it to that upper Main Street based on last meeting, so that's what you see. The blue area is Project Area 2. We're not here to seeking for approval for that tonight, but just as a reminder, we will be back. We'll also be back with signage and lighting for kind of a full campus approval for that. Last time we got some feedback, and I just wanted to kind of run through the feedback that we gave, and then how we addressed it and then we can see the renderings. So the first one was include Upper Main Street in Project Area 1. Pretty simple. We did that, brought it into this submission. There was a lot of talk about the Main Street facade needing more interest, and the review board really wanted to keep the existing awnings. We are adding windows to help with the current solid to void ratio on Main Street. We've also are keeping the existing awnings on Main Street. And then, like Caroline said, we are painting the upper trim that kind of dark green to match the windows, and then also bring together the addition and the stair tower that you'll see, which I think is a really nice kind of change that we did. We're showing signage. We're not here to ask for signage approval, but we are showing this signage just so we can see that. And all the signs that you see meet the size ordinances. We are still kind of working on what that final submission will be. The stair tower, a lot of conversation about the stair tower. We did look at the solid to void ratio of the stair tower. The feedback was to ask to make it feel more integrated through materials, through architecture, et cetera. We added a pretty significant window to balance the current windows you'll see in the later slides. We also did change some of the materials to kind of bring in more interest so it doesn't seem like a green kind of block before. There was show more accurately sized trees and landscaping. All the renderings you'll see will first be what the install height of the landscaping will be, and then we also rendered it at a 10-year growth span. Show materials and bring samples. We showed all the materials. I have samples over there, so if people are interested in certain ones, we can certainly go through those. There's also a key included in this presentation you'll see tonight. And then lastly, show a rendering looking up Bow Street. This is a really important view. That's, I believe, the last rendering that we see, so we've included that. So that will go through. So this is the current, on Main Street, this is the current building elevation that you see. So Caroline mentioned particularly that existing south elevation, all of those windows are existing. And if you flip to the next one, this was our previous design that we showed you before. And if you flip, this is our new proposed updated design. So you can see we added that green trim. We're keeping the existing awnings. We're showing signage on Main Street there. That colored trim actually wraps the corner of the kind of the Main Street massing building, and then comes right back into that green stair tower. So I think I think it's a really nice change. The other thing which we'll go through, and then this is kind of Project Area 1, that stair tower used to be just green. We added we added a window, an upper window. We brought in that kind of same darker material to kind of tie it together, and then below we brought in a wood look panel, which is just a nice looking material, but could just just brings that together a little bit better. This is the material. This is a bit of an eye chart, so my apologies, but we can go through. But these are all of the different materials that we are proposing. So I'll just go order, and then the next slide is a bit of a key. But the roof and the stair tower will be a green metal board and batten. The wood look material would be a wood look board and batten, metal siding once again. Number 3 is a break metal. That's pretty typical for just different accents. So things like the new canopy, places where you have kind of transitions, you'll see in the renderings, that's that dark bronze. It's looking a little green in this photo, but if you look at the real samples. The majority of the kind of the field color is a sandstone color metal board and batten siding. It was chosen to match the existing color of our current buildings, both Home, Hunt Fish, and Main Street. So we're just trying to match that tone. A stone base of real stone, a ledge stone there. The storefront and doors are going to be a dark green. They're currently dark green, so where we need to add new, for example, the stair tower, that will be a dark green. And then anywhere in the main building will be a painted green to match what is existing there. Storefront and doors, this is the new, certain windows, and you'll see in the upper Main Street have the dark bronze, and then the new stair tower, and then the new window addition. And then also in italics, although we're not talking about it tonight, that will show up in project area 2, so we thought it was important to call that out. And then 8 and 9, I don't have samples of, but this is our existing paint, and I couldn't get a sample because it's on the building. So, but you're all familiar with it, and we do have photographs. So this, once again, is a bit, we don't have to spend a lot of time on here, but we can come back. But this is just calling out all of the different materials. And if people have questions, they can kind of hold the materials, and we can go back to this. In the yellow boundaries is where we are proposing changes. So anywhere that's not yellow is already existing. So let's jump into the renderings. Once again, Justin's Way and Main Street, this was the previous rendering, and then this is the new rendering. So I do think you can start to see kind of that color, the materiality, a lot more interest here. This is the install height, and then it's kind of a subtle change, but then that would be that 10-year growth height. Keep going. Previous rendering on Main Street, new rendering showing the new materials. Those are 3 existing trees, just to kind of call that. And then once again, subtle, but that 10-year growth height. Another view from Bowen, Maine, looking more at the building. We do have that. We do have a one looking up in a little bit. So that's one. And as Caroline mentioned, we are trying to utilize a lot of the existing sites. So you'll see that here. You'll see existing vegetation. That's the install height. And then, I missed it. Yeah, so it must have gone to 10-year. No, you're good. Yeah, so subtle change there. But Upper Main Street, once again, this is all project area 2, but we want to give you all context. This over here is what we're here for approval for tonight, and you can see that stair tower. So I think that's a pretty significant and a big improvement. That's a 10-year. Thanks. Sometimes they're just. Overall, you'll never see the site from this view unless you're a bird, but this is the overall view, but it's just nice to see. We didn't have a view previous, but we want to show. So you can see a lot of this a lot of this site already exists, and we're trying to preserve as much of it as possible. But we are creating, and thank you, there's the 10-year view. We are creating a new, larger patio, super accessible kind of way up to Main Street. This gives a good kind of south view of project area 1. Once again, I don't have a previous version because we didn't bring this before, but we want to kind of show how that's coming together.
Could I ask you to go back one?
Sure.
Where you said it's the other areas more accessible to Main Street? Is it still up the steps and everything?
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's still up, yeah, you still have to go up the grade, yeah.
So it's not, accessible, handicap accessible.
Sorry,
is
two
not.
different things, not handicap. We do have, there will be, you can go up like you can now in the handicap accessible, but these will be stairs, yeah.
Oh.
And then here is that new view if you're coming up from Bow Street, what you'll see. So there's the 10-year planting view. Just a reminder, we ended with this slide last time, just project area and schedule. So we're here tonight, project area 1 for March approval. We're hoping to start construction in April, and then project area 2 start construction in 2025. We can certainly go back to any.
Is your construction plan to have number 1 finished totally before you start number 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I should say, there's our phasing versus what we're here to, no, project area 1, what you see tonight, that upper Main Street will be part of the second construction phase, because it's the new addition of the building. So to answer your question, project area 1 that you see tonight will be in 2 separate phases of construction.
Okay.
Previous, just to give you some context, previously, we brought to the board the project phases as they were going to be constructed, but then there was an ask to include project area 1 to be slightly larger, so you could see it bigger, but because of that, it doesn't follow a construction phase.
All right, but you did say that project 2 is going to start construction a year from then.
Yeah.
So my question is, are you going to be, barring any disasters, I hope that's not a good word to say, but barring any problems, there shouldn't be construction all over Main and Bow and then up along the front and inside all at the same time. You're not planning to have many sides of the building done at the same time?
Well, we're working around the building right now, so we're doing Justin's Way, and then we'll do Main Street, and then we will do the upper. So yes, it's our intention to phase those.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Could you go back to the slide that shows the materials with the yellow boxes?
Yeah, my apologies, it's kind of,
Okay, so, and then maybe, is it the one before that has the materials list?
yeah. And all of the materials are labeled, so if you want to see any and then go, we can do that.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understood that what's happening in the Project 1 area is, in fact, wood with paint as opposed to being metal, right?
Yes, yes. In some locations, like that Main Street kind of is wood with paint on it, yep.
Right.
Well, I'm just going to say, thank you very much for listening to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Thanks for being
Yeah.
responsive.
Yeah, this is, the changes that you made are very much in keeping
Yeah.
with my comments. So,
Great.
thank you.
And second those comments that Todd made. Just curious, the Bow Street view of the stair tower, and I love the look of the stair tower. The Bow Street view of the stair tower is, how wide is that stair tower, and will that be obvious where there is no window on that Bow Street view?
Yeah, the Bow Street, if you go back to the one,
you just had
I
it,
think the
yeah.
interesting thing about that, because the elevation does change, is it's actually not super visible, right? And it's not even super visible today. There is vegetation and trees there, which is, in the winter. So we tried to make them transparent so you could see, because it's, whether it's winter or summer, but it's just this area. And
Say, looking up, you're really not going to see much.
I don't think so, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when you walk by there today, you don't actually realize there's that story on top, and then
Yeah.
you see it in the picture and you're like, what's that? So I do feel like when you're right there, like in these renderings, or if you're across the street, I think you'll notice it, but right there, I think you're not really going to notice it as much as you.
Somewhere in here you mentioned murals. Did I just dream that? I
Oh,
thought there
that, I believe, when Project Area 2, what we call our boot plaza, which is outside the right-of-way, yeah.
was- Great.
So that's one thing I didn't add. There's, in the findings and the stuff here, they don't have their lighting and their signage. They know where they're gonna put signage, but because signage, we look at on an entire building basis and all the different facades. In lighting, we look at photometrics and cut sheets universally. They wanna bring those back as a complete package, which I think is really the right strategy
Sure.
in this case. So they know where they're gonna put them and they put them to scale, but you'll see those details when they come back.
Thank you.
Anyone from the public wish to comment or ask a question? Yes? go to, and identify yourself, please.
Hi. I'm Sally Walsh, 24 Lanes Island Way. I was out of town at the time of the sidewalk. I could have probably asked a question there had I known all this stuff. It looks gorgeous. I also happen to be on Complete Streets Committee, and I posed a question when I was finally looking at the things this last week, and nobody could answer the question because people are out of town. So it was suggested I come here and ask. The corner of Justin's Way and Main Street is what we call Chaos Corner. All of us in Complete Streets have not gotten this on the agenda yet, but after the meeting, we all going, what are we going to do with that? Because if we go up there during any of the Visit Freeport things, it is a calamity waiting to happen. Because Justin's Way is two-way traffic. People are trying to turn left coming out of Justin's Way. People are trying to coming up Justin's Way, going down Mechanic Street. Main Street is two-way. And pedestrians are trying to cross every which way. I've almost witnessed 2 accidents, and so has Nate Goodman, and so has Phil. I mean, we've all saying, we've got to sit down and talk about this, but there hasn't been time on our agenda. So I came up to ask about if this has been discussed as part of that redesign on Justin's Way. It looks gorgeous, and it would be lovely to have, but I think it has to be part of the conversation of what we're going to do with that intersection. So Andy Seymour is the LL Bean rep on our committee, and he wasn't there the last couple of meetings. So we've had missing pieces on the committee. So I'd just like to say, we need to add that to the discussion, and I don't know how you want to do that, but I'm not putting the kibosh on things, but we need to do some problem solving around that when they do that new entrance, because there's going to be a lot more people heading there, and parking involved, and sidewalks and all sorts of things, and signage and trees and things. So, that's it. To be continued.
Thank you. Street alignment is not our department.
Yeah, so traffic and circulation on public streets is regulated by the Traffic and Parking Ordinance, overseen by the Complete Streets Committee. So that's really where that conversation needs to be as far as building capacity. They're, at this point, and even at the ultimate end of the project, they're not increasing the capacity of the building. They're actually shrinking the square footage. You know, I get the concern for, you know, possible pedestrian gathering, we'll say. It was all in one area on Main Street. They're now giving the 2 options on the other end, so I'd like to hope that that will alleviate some consolidated traffic congestion. But again, these are, like they've been in the past, these are not the primary entrances of the building. The primary entrances where the site's really designed to draw people is further up. I think these are really gonna grab people like me on my lunch break, to be honest. But the one difference here too is they're not proposing any improvements in the public right-of-way. And unlike the entrance now, where you have no choice but to gather on the sidewalk, they are making the patio improvements on their property at the entrance. So I hope that will alleviate the concerns. But as far as the traffic, I think that is a conversation that Complete Streets should probably have. It's been raised before, and I'm sure LL Bean would share their thoughts on just general traffic and circulation in that area, but no changes are proposed with this project in the right-of-way.
Any other questions or comments?
Let's see. Sally, it says you're online. Nobody, nope, none here.
I'll make a motion, and then we can discuss it. Motion proposed reads as follows. Be it ordered that the Freeport Project Review Board approve the printed findings of facts, design review certificate, and site plan amendment for LL Bean for exterior alterations and site changes of the flagship store at 95 Main Street, Phase 1 of the Main Street Improvement Tax Assessor Map 11, Lot 64, et cetera, to be built as substantially as approved as proposed, submission dated January 2024, finding that it meets the standards of the Freeport Design Review Ordinance and the Freeport Zoning Ordinance with the following conditions of approval approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at the Project Review Board meetings and hearings of the subject application to the extent they're not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to any site work associated with this phase of the project and prior to any issuance of building permits for the proposed changes in this phase, the applicant shall do the following. A, establish a performance guarantee in the amount to cover the cost of all site work associated with the project in an amount to be reviewed and approved by the town's peer-reviewing engineer and in form acceptable to the town attorney. The performance guarantee shall cover the cost of site work, erosion control, stormwater management, landscaping and hardscape, etc., along with performance guarantee and non-refundable administrative fee at the rate established by the Freeport Town Council to be paid. B, establish an inspection account in the amount of $1,000 to cover the cost of site inspection for the site improvements by the town engineer. C, developers shall have a pre-construction meeting with the town engineer. Finally, 3, prior to construction on the proposed building alterations, the applicant shall obtain applicable building permits, all permits from the Freeport Code Enforcement Officer. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I wanted to bring up a point, I couldn't find it when I should have just before you started, but the letter that we got from Mitch Rauda,
Yep, that's in your packet, yep.
yeah, that was eventually in our packet with all this million other papers. He's talking about the sidewalk accessibility, making it, more a wider area and all, and I think we should at least acknowledge that he did send us this letter. I think it was mentioned at our last meeting about this is probably a town sidewalk and it's more of a town issue, but I think it should be addressed at some point because I think it would be a better idea to have a wider sidewalk, and Complete Streets maybe would enjoy that more also.
Make that part of the complete streets discussion, perhaps. I'm sorry we couldn't be responsive to your concern here.
No, that's fine. I mean, this is the first time I saw the entrance, so I thought, this is a little worrisome just to get it built and then have even more problems there.
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion before we vote? All in favor of the motion as presented? It's unanimous, Sharon. Thank you. The next item is the Roberts Shoreland Stabilization is tabled. Cynthia Barrett from 32 Island View Lane, Shoreland Stabilization, a shoreland zoning permit.
So Freeport's coastline has had a lot of damage from recent storms, and so you're going to continue to see a lot of these applications trickle in. So this is a pretty standard shoreline stabilization. You guys are becoming well experienced at these at this point in time. So the applicant included in their submission that they have a southeast facing shoreline that's eroding, and they're proposing to extend an area about 50 feet in length with riprap. It will be about 6 feet below the hat and then 4 feet above. Like most of them you see, they're going to use a combination of filter fabric and riprap of various sizes to stabilize the bank. They did have some wetland impacts, so they will need permitting from Army Corps and DEP. So in this submission, they did say that they're going to remove invasive species and do replanting. They gave you some information on that. We do ask the code officer to look at that for us. He just got back from vacation and looked at it today. He does have some concerns with the vegetation, the removal and the replanting. Looking at the photos included in the submission, it looks like there's some woody vegetation and it's unclear what those are, if they're in fact invasive. So we did have some late day communication with the applicant about getting that mapped out on a plan for him to look at what the existing vegetation is, which is noted in here as invasive, and the specific replanting plan. He would want to look that over. They have submitted, I believe, to DEP and Army Corps. As part of the DEP process, the state law just changed, so we will be hearing from DEP before they issue the NERPA permits for the wetland impact. They will be reaching out to municipalities and the shoreland zoning department there to weigh in on these applications, and if there's an issue, in the past, they haven't held up these NERPA permits. So you had two different kind of reviewing agencies within DEP, and they didn't communicate as clearly as they could with each other. So the state law just changed, so we will see a better relationship between that permitting process, but they will rely on the town. So that being said, we rely on the code officer to look at the vegetation, and so I think if you wanted to take action on this tonight, you could, but I think I would advise that you add a condition of approval that, as requested by the code officer, they submit a detailed plan regarding vegetation removal and replanting to be reviewed and approved by the code officer. If the code officer doesn't approve it, and there are issues identified, and they have to make changes, this is regulated under shoreline zoning, and in Freeport, the only person that can review these shoreline stabilization applications is you guys. So if they have to make changes as a result of that review, they will need to come back to you with a new application. So I just want to be clear on that. I have no staff approval ability, and the applicant, hears that. If there's a change, they're going to have to come back. So that would be my only kind of suggestion here, that you make that conditional upon the code officer review. And again, DEP is going to reach out to the code officer for his input on the shoreland zoning component. So if there's an issue, it's going to have to get resolved before they issue their permits as well. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. And if they are just solely only removing the invasives, that would be okay. But if there's other vegetation, there might be issues there.
So if we get to the point of voting on this motion,
Yeah, there's a numbering issue in the staff
numbering
report.
issue, so
Auto number
what
smarter
is
than
5
staff.
becomes 1, what is 6 becomes 2, and then there would be a third one subject to pending review and approval of further submissions to the code, by the code enforcement
Yeah,
officer.
the applicant, submit detailed plans for vegetation removal and replanting. And the applicant and the representative are here.
Welcome, you want to fill us in?
As best I can. Hi, I'm Cynthia Barnett at 32 Island View.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And this is my neighbor Nate, directly south of me at 30 Island View.
I'm a frequent flyer here.
The serious destabilization of the shoreline, my shoreline, and the erosion of the bank really happened on Christmas Day, 2022, when we all lost power, and we had that massive storm that came through. It just pounded us. I've been a nervous parent watching and down there looking at it and saving my pennies. Nate went through this process and got his application approved in this fall, right? October. So in January, on the 10th and the 13th, when we got hammered again, got it out on the shoreline. And I have a steep bank, and so the erosion is not happy to look at. Nate has been most kindly gracious and helpful in the intricacies of applying and the things that we have to do. I thought that perhaps on page 11, where I thought maybe we addressed the shoreline stabilization with the vegetation, with the invasives, I thought we addressed that maybe there to
And I
Nick's
might
point.
be able to explain a little bit about what Nick's concern was. Maybe, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, Cynthia and Walt, their shoreline used to look identical to mine, where it was always weed whacked and kept down. And then they had some significant erosion that happened, and there's even stories about it in the Portland Press Herald and Maine Monitor. They spent a significant amount of money putting in plantings and doing all of the soft kind of stabilization, which is what is in the pictures that you see.
Right.
It used to be the same shoreline as my house was, which was just kind of weed whacked grass and little pruny things that you just cut down every couple of years. But they were, advised, well, let's do the first step of let's see if we can shore it up by putting in a whole bunch of plants and trees and such, in hopes that that will stabilize things. And as you could see from the photos, and
It has
especially in
not.
the last storm, a lot of those trees and other bushes that they had spent a lot of money putting in failed, and as a result, you see some significant erosion there. So the plants that were put there were not, naturally occurring plants. They were, there was a landscaping company that came in, they had all these, I think the heavy machinery, because I was next door to them and saw it, what it did to your lawn. It wasn't pretty, but, so they made that attempt to do kind of the more soft approach of just putting in trees and plantings, and it didn't work, unfortunately. And thankfully with section, on page 11 of the application where it talks about this, chapter 65, article 3, section 306T, it says, vegetation may be removed in excess of the standards in section 306N of this ordinance in order to conduct shoreline stabilization of an eroding shoreline, provided that a permit is obtained from the project review board. So, construction equipment, blah, blah, blah. So the idea is not to remove any vegetation that's, naturally occurring there, but rather to go back to trying to fix the problem and have it fixed once and for all, instead of having to come back here again every few years, because every time you do go in and start, trying to fix these erosion problems, it does have impacts in the coastal wetlands. So if you can be once and done, that's ideal. And especially to finish it sooner rather than later, because as I'm her neighbor, and so what happens with her property affects my property. What happens with her property also affects Joyce's property, who's to the right. You can see her embankment. She's also on the phone, is slowly getting eaten away. And this was a photo taken, I think, a year ago, a drone shot. Since this time, all of this vegetation has since been completely wiped out. This area here, completely gone. These, I can show you a photo on my phone, these two posts that were there completely eaten out. All of this vegetation, which was identical vegetation to here. So you can see all of this used to be the same as Cynthia's. They weed whacked it every year, kept it down, and then they tried to do this soft erosion control measures. So they planted all of these different things, and you can see it hasn't held up, unfortunately.
Is your house on that picture?
Yeah, my house is here. So I was here back in October. Now this embankment here is now eaten up into here. So I was trying to wait to do all of this, so that way, you can kind of be inconvenient to your neighbor once instead of every couple years. So, yeah, unfortunately, this is the reality that we're all facing, and it's really, it's sad.
That's
But
horrible. So question.
Well, thank you, Nate.
Should have asked you to come to the mic.
No, but he can explain it far better than I.
it's such an emotional
It is.
thing. While Cynthia and my mom is really who lives in this house the majority of the time. She's a retired state nurse, and it's upsetting when you wake up and you see half of your lawn, your yard, your front door disappearing. But there's you can't necessarily just give up on it, but.
Well, we have a plan. We have a plan.
Yes, exactly. I remember when I was in high school, I went to high school in Camden, and have any of you guys ever been to Rockland by the Samoset Resort area? There's, that little lighthouse that walks out there. There used to be a house there, and it got eaten up alive. Does anybody remember hearing this story? I'll pull it up on my laptop. And the whole house went into the ocean and just crumbled. And the hillside is very similar to this hillside.
Your battery's running low.
Battery's running low.
Your battery's running low.
Oh, no, it's
That would be
Does the
it.
board have any questions for the applicant?
Right.
So a question in terms of, so it's going to take some heavy equipment to do this work, right? To put all the new stone and rock in?
Yes,
Yes.
yep, they're,
How are they accessing they're coming in from the shorefront up to the,
No,
coming in from the road, and they're gonna put in special mats and build special things for the excavators to go, so it's a low, so it doesn't impact.
so the excavators will not go down to the beach?
Correct, yep. The excavator has an extra crazy long arm that can reach down there without having to actually go onto the beach area.
So the ordinance, the preference is that they access it from the water because we don't want removal of vegetation, but like we talked about with Luke's application, they have an existing clear path.
Do we need to note that point? Just the language says it's by barge.
I think it's written into the findings here. We usually do put it in there. What,
And I'm not saying there should be a barge there, I just want, if we should note that we're saying no, we
no,
find it
no.
possible for a barge.
Well, they're not asking for a barge. We would require it, but they have to ask for the barge. I mean,
No,
for
no.
not the barge, I'm sorry.
right.
I'm just,
In my,
We're-
when you guys produced the language of my decision, it did talk about the barge. I think there was a paragraph.
We've
about
seen a
it.
lot of them. I don't remember at this point.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so when you guys emailed me the notice of decision for mine, they did talk about the barge, and we considered the barge and would love to do the barge. The unique aspect of this is that we both have this runway that kind of lets you go in, but a lot of times you'll see a site where there's trees all here.
I'm good, I'm just questioning whether legally we need to note it or not, that's all.
So my question is your house, this is a picture prior to your work, right? That's what you're saying? So is your stabilization okay now? Is that what you said, or you
I'm gonna
didn't?
start mine once Cynthia's.
Oh, you didn't do it
I
yet?
haven't started it.
Oh,
I've been waiting patiently because, ideally, you do this kind of once and don't have to disturb everybody's life, concurrently. So if we did mine, for 1 month, then Cynthia gets woken up every morning at 7 a.m. to the sound of beeping machinery. So
Oh, that's
it's nice
okay.
when we can do it all.
I thought you had it done, and I was just going to see if it was,
I did receive, all of my approvals, and my plan is essentially identical to Cynthia's. Army Corps of Engineers has signed off on it, Caroline's seen that, the Maine Historical Society, the tribes.
You got a question?
Yes,
Have you
sir.
have you had a survey of the hat line?
Yes, yep, there's a,
If I, just
Yes.
to clarify, we're asking the applicant.
I believe
Is
there's a
that part of the
line, there's a
material?
line, do you see that line on the photograph?
Yes?
The hat line?
And who is that drawn by?
the state of Maine.
Okay, so do you have a professional land surveyor that has located the hat line?
Yes,
Cynthia's husband is a surveyor,
it's a land surveyor. Luckily.
yes.
Okay. So I don't see that in the application.
On the hat,
It's
the
on
hat line?
page 21.
it's on page 14, there's the line, is it?
Detail on page 21, there's detail of the line, can't see the source of it.
Yeah, look at
I'm looking for a
Oh,
survey.
it says Maine
Yeah,
Geographic
that's
Survey.
geolibrary.
An illustration on the Maine Geological Survey is not a survey.
There's one on 21, and there's one on the NRPA site too. And Walt, let's see, here it is, on page
24.
24 has it.
But again, that looks like, that's not something that,
That's what all the
Located
other
by-
applications use, that hat line to determine their hat line.
you can tell, the ordinances generally require work that is within the shoreline zone to be held to survey control. You know, in other words, what, like, we're gonna locate where the line is to ensure that when we're like dumping things, it's being put in the correct spot. That 6 feet below hat line doesn't become 10 feet below the hat line.
Correct.
And I'm concerned, I think with this application reflects some of what we're seeing here and there, which is not much information aside from kind of sketches and drawings to ensure that it's going to be built to standard.
But the work, when they perform the work, it has to be built to an accurate location of the hat line, right?
But how,
They're permitting on a DEP, they're permitting locally, DEP and Army Corps. Let me look, I don't know if the shoreline stabilization requires a survey. I don't know if we've always been getting, I hear your concern.
and maybe it's an ordinance issue, because there's a whole host of categories in which we require, if you do work in the shoreline zone, it has to be survey control.
Yeah, let me.
And so if we've decided that this is a category that's outside of the realm of survey control, and we're not going to ask for a survey, then that's one thing.
I don't think we have, but let me look, let me pull it up here, because these site plans much easier for me to answer. on the fly.
This is similar to the application that was filed in October.
I understand that, but I think it reflects the broader issue that we're seeing lots of these that are just drawn on, like, when the state draws hat lines.
It does say on the Pine State Environmental Worksheet, item number 3 says contractor will have a main DEP erosion control certified individual on site during all soil disturbance. I don't know if that gets to your question of hat line.
It doesn't. We're talking about locations within the intertidal zone.
Well, can't we just make a condition that the work will have to conform to an accurate location of the hat line?
I don't see in here that we require a survey. Interestingly enough, like when we take measurements from the top of the bank, the unstable bluff, we're relying on the geological survey maps. It's different, but I'm just putting that out there for an example. I don't see that it specifically requires a survey. Lake site plan clearly requires that.
Yeah.
Why don't we just make it a condition of the approval?
And I think that's something that we can certainly do. I mean, I'm not
Yeah, you're just
I'm not
asking the
opposed to this,
question
but I
going forward.
want to
Yeah.
kind of flag that,
Yeah.
like, the locations of the hat line and, are an important part of these applications
Let
that
me just, let me
I know
look-
that in a building permit, the code enforcement officer requires that the hat line be established on site.
that a surveyor come and say it's here.
Yes.
And then they measure back from it.
Let me just look really quick and just see if we have a survey in file on this property, just in general.
You could read the motion with your amendment to it. Makes sense.
Would those, would that data and line and mapping and survey be part of the Army Corps of Engineers permitting?
Only if it was part of the submission to the Army Corps of Engineers. Now,
Yeah, well, it says in, I'm reading on page 24 of the staff report,
See if we have.
and it says, in addition to municipal review permitting from both the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, Natural Resource Protection Act permit, and the Army Corps of Engineers are required. So I assume those have been submitted?
They have. and
They have.
They were approved, and the Army Corps of Engineers came out to my property and looked at both my property and Cynthia's property, and looked at the hat lines and did all kinds of measurements with tripods and things. This process is extensive. It's pretty amazing how much work the state and the federal government does in doing these things.
Yeah, I don't see that we have a survey. I don't see that it's required. I can definitely look into it. We have a whole slew of these coming next month. And if it's something we want to get clarification from DEP on.
Why don't we do that in the meantime? And I don't think it's any further burden on you for us to have a requirement that you have a surveyor establish where the hat line is before you do the work.
No, that won't be a problem.
Is there any other comments or questions from the board? Is there a motion, Jim?
I gotta find the page. Suppose it's only fair after I've drawn it out.
28, page 28, halfway down.
Thank
Short.
It's got
So,
all these conditions on top.
I move that the project review board order approval of a shoreline zoning permit for Cynthia Barnett for a shoreline stabilization project, approximately 50 feet in length, at a residential property at Tax Assessor Map 5A, Lot 51, at 32 Island View Lane, to be built substantially as proposed in an application dated 1/14/24, finding that it meets the standards of Section 306 and Section 404 of the Town of Freeport Shoreline Zoning Ordinance with the following conditions of approval. One, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at the project review board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent that they are not in conflict with other stated conditions. Two, prior to the start of any site work for the project, the applicant obtain any applicable permits from the Freeport Code Enforcement Officer. Should be,
And then the survey
well,
requirements.
there should be another standard, another requirement that it's, receives all permitting from the Army Corps of Engineers and the DEP. And then four, the condition that the hat line be located by a professional land surveyor prior to the start of construction.
And if I could add another condition, the one that Caroline described was subject to the pending review and approval of the code enforcement officer for additional information.
On vegetation removal and
Oh.
replanting.
Yeah.
Do you get that, get all that, Sharon?
I can get it off my tape.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right?
5 parts, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? I'll move the motion. All in favor of the motion as read with 5 conditions? Unanimous, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, thank you.
Thank you
Very
guys for your
much.
time.
Thank you.
The last agenda item,
So this last agenda item, really, if it wasn't in design review, it would have been a good candidate to go to staff review board, but because they're in design review and making changes, they're here before you. Thank you so much.
see you later.
So on Depot Street, there's a row of mallet houses, and on the corner of Depot and West Street, kind of right behind us, there's a white one with green trim, and it has a garage. You probably drive by it every day, and that's the property Colleen and Thomas are here for. It's currently a single-family home. There's a garage and storage building on the side that they want to convert to an office, and in this case, office means a hair salon. It's about 600 square feet. So they're seeking approval for a mixed-use development. As my theme tonight, I'll do the site plan portion first because it's the easier of the two. They are proposing to they have a existing driveway which can fit 2 cars to serve the existing single-family. They have 2 parking stalls on the site. They're going to add a 3rd parking stall coming in off of Depot Street. There might be some small adjustments to that area. They had something in their submission that they don't trigger an ADA parking requirement, but if they can fit a small aisle width, they do want to do that just in case they have a user, and Thomas is going to clarify that when he gives his
You
comments.
said Depot Street, you meant West Street.
West Street, yes, thank you. So that, we might see some tweaking there, and he can address that when he summarizes it. Otherwise, they'll be putting a small walkway connecting the parking area to the back entrance. They are proposing changes to the garage facing Depot Street. They'll be removing the garage door and putting in a single standard entrance door. going around the side on West Street, there's an existing garden which they're going to retain, and there's a single window. They want to add a second window. And so when we talk about this, we're talking vinyl windows because that's what's already on the building. And then if you go to the rear facade, they are going to do some upkeep to the skirting on the deck. They're going to replace the doors and the windows. There is a large window that kind of has, I'll call it 3-bay, that's not the exact word, but you'll know what I mean when you look at the drawings. And they're proposing to replace that with 2 side-by-side windows so they can open it. And then facing the community center, which really won't be that visible from the public right away, they're proposing a small transom. They had hand-drawn renderings. You'll see that they're proposing to reside the building with shingles, and they are proposing to paint it. As far as the material details, they did have a couple tweaks. So the transom, there's actually a cut sheet in there to show you what it's going to look like and what the detail will be. And also that window on the back side of the building. It is a commercial space, again, in the garage, so they are proposing a sign. It'll be wood with metal trim, and the details on the signage were included. They gave details on the full cut-off lighting fixtures. They already have their capacity letters from the utilities. So really, they have pretty minimal conditions. The conditions are really to get permit from the code officer, and then any applicable permits from Public Works. They are changing the use, and if they're putting that third space in, they might need street opening. So we just have a condition that they get permits from them. I think the one thing Thomas could clarify would just be that where they landed with that parking, where they wanted to put the aisle width, but they need the space to do the 3 parking stalls across at 9 feet wide.
Right. I'm going to clarify now.
Yep, you guys ready to hear from the applicant?
Tom Kivler, and this is Colleen Brink, and we're the owners of that building. And so it's going to need 32 feet. I don't have that measurement. I didn't realize that we needed the additional 5 feet. We just learned that when we talked about it the other day. So the aisle for the wheelchair is recommended. It's not required. When I spoke to the ADA people, we want to make sure it's as accessible as we can make it. So if there's 32 feet there from the existing right side of the driveway, if you're on West Street, and we can go over 32 feet, we can do that because we'll have 27 plus the 5 for that. It's just a painted up wheelchair aisle.
You need to, oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't remember.
If we're not able to do that for some reason, we'll just not, we'll forego the wheelchair aisle, as it's a recommendation, not a requirement.
So I think if the board's okay with that adjustment, it'd be good just to put a condition there, unless you want to have them come back. They're proposing to pave that third space, and there's a retaining wall on the side of, a small retaining wall on the side of it.
So if we, the condition would be,
What do you think the width of that is drawn at, do you remember?
As far as I can tell, when I looked at the large poster, which is to scale, it's like 29 feet. We'd need like additional 3 feet.
Oh, okay, so the applicant may modify the 3 parking stalls to include an accessible aisle width as space allows. So they're really just looking to see if they have a couple feet. Again, there's 2 spaces existing there, so we're talking about adding that space going towards Main Street. If that makes sense.
Is it accurate that part of the parking is off the property?
Yeah, they actually had a survey done. Luckily, that's not the part that they're proposing any changes to. There's quite a bit of stuff down there in the right-of-way, but they did have the surveyor verify all the information. I think there's a fence there, too. And this was actually, I guess, back in the day, part of like shared parking, way before they owned it. So I don't know the history of it, but it's there, and they're not proposing changes to those portions.
Okay.
And the railroad right away.
and this would be, it's before us only because it's design review? Otherwise, it could be a candidate for
Yeah,
staff review?
otherwise, honestly, with the square footage changes, they probably could have been town planner approval.
Yep.
And again, if they didn't want to put the parking, or at some point, if the railroad came to them and they had to remove existing parking, VC1, they could participate in the leased parking pool.
mean, we do have a lawn there. We'd rather leave the lawn. It's nice.
Yeah, they are proposing some areas of fencing and a couple vegetation, because they do have residents living there.
So I just had a question on so there's 3 bays, so will the 2 spots be enough for your customers and everybody who's working there to park?
Wheelchair aisle.
Anybody who's working there won't be parking there for sure. They'll be parking elsewhere, and there is parking right across from Depot Street.
Okay.
Or just
Yeah.
like, it's right over here, so even right over here, park. So we think so. It's just a 3-booth salon, and we think that's adequate parking. Yeah.
I'll make a motion unless there are questions or comments from the board. Questions from Shop or Eric?
I do have another question related to like the special features on the shed that you're putting in the corner. In that this is the design review area. Will that shed be visible from the street or?
I don't think so. I mean, we're tucking it back as far as we can. That's why it has to be of a non-combustible material. So I don't think it will be. There's not a lot of room to look back there with the deck and the fence, so it's going to be tucked in around the deck.
Okay.
I got a question for Caroline. Since this does abut the railroad tracks, and there is the fence, so I'm not worried about that. But from the railroad, is that also considered viewing from the right-of-way, public right-of-way?
We've never looked at it that way.
Railroads aren't public right-of-ways.
Yeah, it is private property, like they have their own police that deal with it, so we've never,
They have their own impossible rules and their own impossible police. I've dealt with railroads.
But in terms of viewing,
yeah.
like from a roadway, which is what we would consider.
No, I mean, we would
we
view
wouldn't
from West
consider
Street.
from the railroad.
No, we wouldn't.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, we did talk about the shed when they came in. We flagged that, but knowing that I flagged a concern for metal where it was design review, but again, we're up against that non-combustible, and so they did try to put it in the least visible spot, which I've driven by there many times, and I can't even tell you what's in that back corner, so I do think it won't be that visible, and it's less than 100 square feet, I believe, it's pretty small.
Yeah, it's like 7 by 4. Yeah.
Yep.
Colleen had designed a very lovely shed, but it has to be non-combustible.
I'll make a motion for the board's consideration. Proposed motion is be it ordered, the Freeport Project Review Board approve design review certificate and site plan approval for Colleen Brink and Thomas Kivler for a building to be used as a mixed-use development, residential and office at 59 Depot Street, tax assessor map 11, lot 142, to be built as substantially as proposed per application dated 9/7/2023. Find that it meets the standards of the Freeport Design Review Ordinance and Section 602 of the Freeport zoning ordinance with the following conditions of approval. 1, this approval incorporates by reference all supporting plans that amend the previously approved plans submitted by the applicant and their representatives at the Project Review Board meetings and hearings on the subject application to the extent they're not in conflict with other stated conditions. 2, prior to the start of any site work for the project, the applicant obtained applicable building permits from the Freeport Department of Public Works for any work to be in the public right-of-way. Prior to start of construction on the building, the applicant shall obtain any applicable building permits from the Freeport Code Enforcement Officer. And adding a 4th condition, applicant may modify the 3 parking spots to create an accessible aisle if space permits. Is there a second?
Second.
Who was
Any-
that? Sorry.
So you just sound like a majority of the vote.
I think half. Carl, second.
We're giving Fred,
Whoever you want.
Fred gets credit for the second.
Any discussion before we vote? All in favor of the motion as presented? Unanimous, Sharon, thank you.
Oh, I meant to go into the changes on design review, but they didn't come up on that one, so.
Yeah. Anything else for us on the agenda?
No, I think the only thing I'd ask you guys at this point, does anyone know that they cannot be here next month?
I will most likely be away.
Okay.
What's the exact date?
20th, I think.
The next meeting would be March 20th.
As I know, I'm okay.
Of the applications I have so far, 6 are shoreline stabilization.
Yes,
So I think you guys could, and the code officer's back, and we have extra time, so I think we can have him do a full review. I'll remember to put the DEP Army Corps condition. We'll find out about the survey question. too.
And I just had clarification for my point. I think it was on our first agenda item. I mentioned the west end of Portland. I meant the east end, Monjoy Hill.
Knew what you meant.
And
That's what we thought.
I was going to ask you what was going on in the West End.
And my response to that would be, we encourage you all to participate in the comprehensive plan update process to get your thoughts documented.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Linda?
Yes, so moved.
Second, all in favor of adjourning? Anything else? Microphone's off. I think the Beans project looks a lot better.
Oh, it looks great. Oops.
Good night, everybody. You what?
I'm just congratulating you on getting these to look a lot better.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you know,
Thanks, yeah.
Do you like it better, Thomas?
yeah.